Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Little Miss Funeral YouTube channel. I had a question on one of my videos from a David Matheny. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, David. And I just think, once again, it was a wonderful question that just inspired this video. David had asked, I'm curious as to how all of the financial aspects actually work. For instance, unless it's a prepaid funeral, I'm assuming you bill the customer insurance at some point following the services. So before you receive payment, how are all the other expenses paid, such as the casket, vault, plot, printing, etc.? Are you billed for these at a later time, or do you have to pay first and recoup these expenses once you receive customer payment? Which brings up another concern: what happens if a customer after the fact becomes unable or refuses to pay for the services rendered? Once again, I know that there are a couple of different things in those questions. Do you all see Lindy right now? Like, I don't know if you can see him with the way that my camera is, but he, like I said in numerous videos, is such a good dog, and then the minute I start to film, he starts eating and running around and trying to just play. So if you ever hear like weird noises, or if like you see me like doing things, it's probably my dog Lindy Ruff. But anyways, to get back to David's question with regards to payment and different options, I'm really going to try to answer this to the best of my ability, but the main thing that I need to stress within this video is that every single funeral home is different. Basically, funeral homes can determine what their own payment policies are. I have worked for a funeral home that requires payment by the day of the services, and there's no exceptions to that. If this is the funeral home that you want to work with, and if these are the services, and if they come out to be $12,000, the family has to pay $12,000 by that service date, which sometimes can be 2 or 3 days after the actual cause of passing. I've also worked for funeral homes where they have a payment policy, where basically some items are required to be paid to the funeral home by the day of the services, but then they have, say, a 30 or 60-day payment policy after that for the remainder of the funeral bill. I understand both directions why funeral homes may require payment by the day of the services, and I understand why they give families payment options as well. You do not walk into Best Buy and just pick up a TV and say, bill me in 30 days. You have to put that on a credit card or pay cash, or you have to give them some kind of a payment for that item that you want to take home with you. So I understand that mindset. You pay us by the day of the services because we have a lot of work that we're doing. We're giving you merchandise and we can't wait for the payment. I get that, but obviously with regards to a funeral, that can be such a large expense that is required sometimes so unexpectedly if a person had passed away, that it can be really difficult for a family to come up with all of that money unless their loved one had some sort of life insurance or a large bank account. Now, I also understand the giving families some time to pay a funeral bill because, once again, death can be very unexpected, and not everybody has thousands of dollars just lying around at home ready to give to somebody whenever they need it. But there's a lot of issues with funeral homes allowing families a payment policy. For example, when I work under that situation where a payment policy is in place where not all of the money is due by the day of the services, there have been instances where families try to skip out of the bill. You're really working with the trust of the family, hoping that they don't, for lack of a better term, screw you over down the road, and that they will pay the funeral bill. Now, for the types of payments that are acceptable, most funeral homes will accept any of the following. Obviously, cash. Cash is always good, right? Funeral homes will also accept checks. It depends on the firm whether or not they will accept a bank check or a personal check. Sometimes they won't accept personal checks for obvious reasons. They don't want it to bounce or anything like that. A lot of funeral homes will also accept credit card as a payment. And then most funeral homes will also accept an insurance assignment. And the insurance assignment works a little bit differently than the other payments. If a family comes in and they want to pay by life insurance, we do something called an assignment, in which we get the information about this death benefit, and we find out who the beneficiary is and how much the policy is for and all of that information. And then our funeral home will contact the life insurance company on the behalf of the family. We let them know that we're working with somebody, their loved one has just passed away, and they want to use a portion of the life insurance to pay for the funeral bill. Now, typically what happens is the life insurance company will send the funeral home a claim form, which is just a couple of pages that they need filled out and signed by whoever the beneficiary is. The funeral home then typically has to also provide a copy or an original death certificate, depending on what the life insurance company requires. They also have to send in an assignment, which basically says we only need this amount of money out of the policy. So if your loved one has a $10,000 policy and the funeral arrangements came to $6,000, the funeral home doesn't want to be paid the $10,000, they just want to be paid that $6,000. So that paperwork is stating that the family's assigning over $6,000. And then lastly, the funeral home also has to provide an itemized bill with all of the services so that the life insurance company knows how they got to that $6,000 figure. Once that is all sent in to the life insurance company and the next of kin or beneficiary signs off on all the paperwork giving them permission to do so, the life insurance company will release the money to the funeral home to pay for the funeral bill, and then they will also release, if there's anything left over, to the beneficiary as well. However, the funeral home doesn't get paid right away. Now, I've never not worked for a funeral home that doesn't accept life insurance policies as a form of payment. And typically, we don't have to wait for the payment to come in from the life insurance companies. As long as the funeral director in the funeral home is making the appropriate phone calls and talking to who they need to talk to on the life insurance company side of things, we know that that is guaranteed payment. I do know that there are some funeral homes out there, however, that will wait until the life insurance company pays them for the services before they'll do any sort of funeral arrangements. My recommendation for anybody out there, because financials are always a concern when somebody passes away, is to do your research and to make a couple of different phone calls. You can call a funeral home and request prices for services that you're looking for over the phone. They have to give you that information along with offer you a copy of their general price list. Now, they can make the general price list available for a consumer to come to the funeral home to pick up, and they can also mail or email a general price list over to a family. But that is so important. Funeral firms are not allowed to just make up prices off of their heads. They have to make certain that they're going off of their general price list that they have available and ready to give to every single family that walks through the door or calls or emails. Once you secure that information for how much the services are going to cost, you can ask the funeral home what their payment policy is. And you don't have to work with anybody that you're not comfortable working with. So if you're talking to a funeral firm and they require payment by the day of the services, and if you know you're not in a financial spot to do that, you can call other funeral homes and find somebody who will work with you and who does offer some sort of a payment policy. Now, the thing that's so hard about payment as well is people think that, oh, a funeral is going to be $12,000 and the funeral home is just pocketing all of that money. And that is not the case at all. I've kind of talked about this a little bit in my video where I complain about complaints in the funeral industry, but what the general public doesn't realize is that even though a funeral may be $12,000, the funeral firm has so many expenses that comes out of that. You have to pay your employees for the services that they're doing. If you're using a trade service, you have to pay them for doing the transfer and the embalming. But you also have to pay your manufacturers like your caskets and your vaults and your urn companies. There are also cash advance items that are often on contracts that are required to be paid by the date of the services, whether the funeral home is fronting that money or the funeral home is requiring the family members to pay those items. And a lot of times those include your cemetery or your crematory charges, your church and minister fees, your news notices, your death certificates, and any other sort of item that's not related directly to the funeral firm. So there are certain instances where a funeral home may pay an opening and closing fee at a cemetery on behalf of the family, and they're hoping that the family is going to be honest and reimburse them for that down the road. Most funeral firms will require the family to pay the cash advance items over to those appropriate parties themselves, just so that they don't get stuck with a large funeral bill that they have paid, hoping for goodwill from the family, but a family ending up not reimbursing them. It's one of those situations where you often hear a funeral firm is taking advantage of a grieving family, but that role can be so reversed where a family takes advantage of a funeral home, because if it's not required to be paid by the day of the services, they may try to skip out on a bill, because what's a funeral home going to do? Go and dig grandma up from the cemetery because the family didn't pay them? So I hope that this video answered some of those questions. I hope that it maybe cleared some things up with regards to funeral home payment and what is required when. Once again, it's such a hard question to answer because every single funeral firm is different, but this is kind of just like your broad, general, blanket answer to all of those questions. Thank you to David for asking me this wonderful question that inspired this video. If you all liked it, you can give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any videos that I put out in the future. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.